About 10 years ago, I was living with my aunt and uncle in a quiet neighborhood just outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It wasn't a bad area, but it wasn't the kind of place where you'd leave doors unlocked either. My cousin Daniel and I shared a small, crowded bedroom. Twin beds pressed against opposite walls, with piles of clothes and books covering nearly every inch of the carpet. Daniel and I argued a lot, mostly about space, but we were inseparable. He was older, louder, the kind of guy who could walk into a room and take it over. I was quieter, more withdrawn. Even though he annoyed me, I always felt safer when he was around. When Daniel left for college, the room became mine. For the first time, I had space to breathe. I pushed his bed out, set up a desk in the corner, and covered the walls with posters I liked. Nights were quiet without him, almost too quiet, but I loved having a place of my own. 2 years later, I went off to university, and Daniel came back home. He reclaimed the room like nothing had changed, and I was pushed into the small guest room above the garage. I didn't complain, it gave me privacy. That little room became mine, even though the creaks and groans from the garage door below always unsettled me. One Friday night, I was alone. My aunt and uncle had gone to their cabin for the weekend, and Daniel was spending a few days in Chicago with friends. The house was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the faint tick of the clock in the hall. I read for a while, then lay in bed scrolling through my phone. That's when I heard it, the garage door. It rattled and groaned beneath me, the familiar mechanical sound echoing through the floorboards. But no one was supposed to be home. My heart stopped. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Daniel had come back early. Maybe he'd forgotten something. But then I heard footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate, 2 sets of them. And then came the voices, low, urgent whispers that sent ice down my spine. I grabbed the old aluminum bat, leaning against the closet. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it. I called 911, whispering into the phone. The dispatcher told me to stay quiet and wait for officers. But waiting felt impossible. The voices grew louder. They weren't Daniel. They weren't my uncle. They were strangers. I crept down the hall, every creak of the floor sounding like thunder in the silence. When I reached my aunt and uncle's bedroom, the door was slightly open. I pushed it just enough to see inside and froze. 2 men stood there, rifling through drawers. One had a flashlight clenched in his teeth. The other had a knife glinting in his hand. Before I could think, my body moved. I charged in, swinging the bat with everything I had. The first hit landed hard against the leg of the man with the flashlight. He collapsed, screaming, but the other one lunged at me, slamming me into the carpet. The air rushed out of my lungs. He pressed the knife to my throat, his breath hot and sour against my face. My vision blurred. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. Then they started faint, far away, but growing closer. The man cursed and yanked his friend to his feet. Within seconds, they were gone, crashing out the back door, just as the red and blue lights flooded the street. The police found nothing. No fingerprints, no forced entry. The only clue was that my garage opener had been taken from my unlocked car. That's how they got in. The officers looked at me carefully and said something that still chills me. These guys knew exactly when the house would be empty, which meant this wasn't random. Someone had been watching us. This happened just last year in Cleveland, Ohio. I had recently moved back to town to help care for my mother, who was in her late 60s and struggling with her health. She was stubborn, independent, and hated asking for help. But I knew her balance wasn't great anymore, and I worried every day that she'd fall when nobody was around. I rented a small duplex about 20 minutes away from her house. It wasn't big, but it was close enough that I could rush over if she needed me. Most nights, I'd check in with a quick call before bed, just to make sure she was okay. That small routine gave me peace of mind. One Friday evening, around 9 p.m., my phone rang. The number was local, but I didn't recognize it. When I picked up, a calm female voice introduced herself as a nurse from St. Mary's Hospital. She said my mother had been admitted after a bad fall. My chest tightened immediately. She knew my mother's full name. She knew her address. She even mentioned her hip surgery from a few months back. Everything she said sounded legitimate. Without hesitation, I grabbed my keys and ran out the door. I didn't lock it. I didn't even think about it. The drive to the hospital was torture. My thoughts raced. What if she hit her head? What if she didn't make it? By the time I parked, I was sweating and trembling, already rehearsing what I'd say to her when I saw her. But when I reached the reception desk and asked for my mother, the nurse stared back at me with confusion. She checked her system and shook her head. "There's no one here by that name tonight," I insisted. I told her I'd just gotten a call from someone claiming to work there. The nurse looked sympathetic, but firm. "Sir, there's been no admission under that name all day. I think you should call your mother directly." My hands shook as I dialed her number. After 2 rings, she answered, sleepy, annoyed, perfectly fine. "Why are you calling so late?" I was asleep. That's when my stomach dropped. The call had been a trick. Someone had lured me out of my house. I sped back home, praying I was wrong. But the second I walked through the door, I knew the place was destroyed. Drawers ripped open, cabinets emptied, my belongings scattered across the floor. They'd taken my laptop, my TV, even my small jewelry collection. But that wasn't the worst part. They'd taken my family photos out of their frames. The frames were left on the shelves, but the pictures were gone. They'd also raided my bathroom and stolen prescription bottles with my name on them. Who steals photos and empty pill bottles? The police arrived, but I could tell they were already writing it off as a burglary. I explained the phone call, how personal it had been, how they'd known details about my mother that no stranger could guess. One officer finally admitted, "This wasn't random. Whoever did this knew you." For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the duplex made me jump. Every time the phone rang, I froze. Someone out there had all my personal information, my family pictures, even my medical details. And worst of all, they hadn't just stolen things, they'd studied me. They knew my life. I installed cameras, locks, alarms, everything I could think of. But none of it eased that sinking feeling, the sense that I was being watched. This one happened 2 years ago in Phoenix, Arizona. I was living alone in a small rented house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing special, just a 2-bedroom with a creaky fence and a tiny front porch. It wasn't much, but after years of roommates, I loved the solitude. One Thursday night, around 11 p.m., someone began pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. The wood rattled under each hit. My stomach twisted. When I peeked out the window, a man was standing there. His clothes were wrinkled and dirty, his hair messy, his eyes wild. He looked desperate, almost manic. I cracked the door, but kept the screen locked. He shouted immediately, "This is my house. You're trespassing." His voice was furious, trembling with rage. He demanded I let him in. I tried to reason with him, told him he must have the wrong address. But then he said something that made me freeze. He described things inside my house. Things he shouldn't have known. He said, "The back door sticks, you have to lift it to open it, right? Then, that bathroom door slams into the toilet if you're not careful." My mouth went dry. He was right. Then he pulled out a folder and started showing me documents. A lease agreement with his name on it. Mail addressed to him at my address. Even photos, pictures of him inside my house, sitting on my couch, cooking in my kitchen, lying in my bed. I wanted to believe they were fake, but they looked real, too real. When I told him I was calling the police, his entire demeanor changed. He went silent, almost calm. "Fine," he said. "I'll wait outside while you do that." Then he walked into the darkness. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They brushed it off as a disturbed man, maybe a scam. But 2 weeks later, I came home to find my house ransacked. Not just robbed, ransacked. Every drawer emptied, every cabinet overturned. And yet, most valuables were untouched. Whoever it was, they were searching for something specific. The locks showed no sign of forced entry, which meant they had a key. I had the locks changed, added cameras, and tried to convince myself it was over. But the truth is, nothing about it has ever made sense. Who was he? How did he have photos of himself in my house? How did he have my keys? Some nights, when the wind rattles the windows, I imagine him out there, waiting for me to forget, waiting for the perfect moment to come back.